everyone, and welcome to the Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana Feasibility Study public meeting. The purpose of the study is to try to find ways to manage the risk of flooding in Tangipahoa Parish. So we have presenters from the Army Corps of Engineers. They're going to be talking about the progress that they've made on the study so far, but we also want to solicit feedback from the public, from people who actually live and work in Tangipahoa Parish. Your feedback is very important just to help us try to find ways that, if any, that we could help to manage the risk of flooding in the parish. So after the presentation, which should last about a half an hour, you're more than welcome to go up to our subject matter experts. They'll have maps and the charts in the back that you can look at and just ask them any questions you would like about the study. And for those of you watching via Facebook Live, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave them in the comments section, and we could bring those to the project team. Thank you for coming, and thank you for watching.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Okay, can everybody hear me? All right. He kind of stole all my lines. He told you exactly what you're here for and what we'll be doing. So just a formal agenda for tonight. We're going to tag team this effort. We have engineers, some economists up here, biologists up here to tell you why we're here, what the study is about, the scope of the study, timeline, schedule. But the real purpose for tonight, like Ryan said, was we want to hear from you. We want to hear from residents and the people that live in the area of what your problems are associated with flooding. So like Ryan said as well, the information that we hear from you tonight is important. We will take that, take it back, include that in our analysis. We've already talked to some folks about some erosion north of here, in some of the creek and the tributaries, and we'll take all of that information and include that in our analysis. So we'd love to hear your input for this evening. So let's start with a little bit of the study overview. Of course, we're the Corps of Engineers, so everything we do has an authority, right? So the study for the Tangipahoa Parish flood risk management study, it was funded and authorized under under WRDA. So a lot of what we do is authorized under the Water Resources Development Act. Funded through DRSA is the acronym. Maybe folks have heard that. So it's a disaster relief funding pot. And when the Corps receives funding, authorization and funding, we can implement our planning process, what's called like SMART planning principles. And I'll go into that in a little bit. So our sponsor in the project, and they're here tonight, I just kind of want to introduce them, or if you just want to raise your hand, our sponsor for this project is the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority Board, so CPRA. We have some folks here. Thanks for coming. And then, of course, they're the sponsor, but we have a multitude of agencies and, parish-wide, statewide, natural resource agencies and stakeholders that we will include and have been coordinating with so far, also including tribal and cultural communities as well. And I just want to mention also that we've been working with the parish and with CPRA and, taking inventory of their master plans, community plans, land use plans, anything that they have that we can use as resources. We've been working with them to gain more information on that. So this is a parish-wide study. We are looking at the entire Tangipahoa Parish. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know that's on this slide, but it's just, highlighting the highlights of your parish, right? The industry in the area. Tangipahoa River, of course, runs north to south, all the way down to Lake Pontchartrain. So, we're looking at that river in terms of a designated wild and scenic river, right? And then, of course, on the southern end, we have Joyce Wildlife Management Area. And then the national transportation corridors, I-55 and I-12, not only serve as, a significant evacuation route, transportation route for the parish, but it also serves as a route for the metropolitan New Orleans area for evacuation. So what we want to hear from you tonight, we are aware of federal disaster declarations, right, that have occurred in the parish. the history behind those. There's a table here, and then actually, and then some since then, since Ida, in the 2020, 21. But what we want to kind of focus in on for this study scope and what we're authorized to look at is because the parish receives, I think, 8 different types of flooding, right? So we are looking at specifically like a flood risk management, right? But because the parish sits on the southern end, it has Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas, we have to include the coastal effects, right? So the scope also includes analysis and the impacts caused by coastal flooding. So in those areas on the southeast portion of the parish where there's overlap of Tangipahoa River and the coastal, we will also include in our analysis the storm surge and the waves in that area. And then within the parish, in the street, and H&H will go into this, our hydraulic engineer will go into this, but for tributaries and smaller streams, the scope includes a stream that has discharge of 800 CFS. So we'll go into that a little bit longer. So in that yellow box there, that's where we're at right now. So we are just in the initial planning phase here, and right now, we're kind of in the middle of the formulate alternatives right there. So this is the 6-step process that Corps of Engineers conducts on feasibility studies. So we are in the define the problem, looking at inventory, future forecasting conditions. So that's what we're here for tonight as well. We want that information from you all. Some questions that you might want to be thinking about while we are going through the study and some of the existing conditions in the area. Do we have this right? Do we have these problems captured right? The sources of flooding. What event did your community see damages? Any information you can provide to us, data, modeling, things like that. So the next 3 or 4 slides are part of the planning process. So we look at the problems, we look at the objectives, we look at some constraints and considerations. So the overall problem, and this is, and Ryan said this from the get-go, is that obviously the parish-wide, there's continually impacts on flooding. And like I said before, the sources of flooding throughout the parish vary. So hurricanes, tropical storms, riverine, heavy rainfall events. And of course that causes significant risk to residential and commercial structures. So just a couple things to note specific to the parish. So the following lines underneath are specific to the parish, and what we've heard from talking to the sponsor and to the parish officials is, you know, what we heard was there is life safety risk here, right? Some of the national transportation corridors are flooded, especially I-55 and 190, 445, and State Highway 22. So that affects, you know, a considerable amount of population in the area. And so our goal is to identify and potentially recommend some measures that can help reduce those flood impacts, the risk to residents, to public safety. As part of the planning process, we always look at what is in the parish that we have to consider and could be a constraint for us, right? So this is just a kind of a list of those. The number one thing we might, we thought maybe we'd mention tonight, and this, necessarily hasn't been identified specifically, but, we don't want to propose something that could promote development in the floodplain. It's a pretty typical kind of constraint for a flood risk management project, but again, the 800 CFS could potentially be a constraint for some of the flooding in the area. We always have to consider hazardous waste concerns throughout. So if you guys, basically my takeaway is if you know of any of these in your communities, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to the team to walk through some specific existing conditions for each of your disciplines.
This thing on? Yep. Okay. So I'm an economist for the Corps of Engineers, and one question you may be asking is, well, what does an economist do? And one thing that we do is we develop a structure inventory. And so this map here on the left, this is a heat map of the structures that we've developed for Tangipahoa Parish. And so essentially this is just a database of structures from homes to businesses to critical infrastructure. This helps us assess and analyze essentially the flood risk in this area. So we pair this data with hydraulics and hydrology data that our friends in engineering will give us. And that's going to help inform us as to which buildings are expected to experience flood damages and also to what extent. And so what we really want to hear from you, as we have just before, is any problems you may have and any addresses, things like that. We can help. That can help inform us and to further develop our structure inventory. So make sure that that's accurate. Yeah. So these are just some FEMA flood claim statistics. So this is just one data source of many that we use kind of as a starting point to see where the problem lies. And so down on the left side, this is another heat map of FEMA flood claim statistics. A lot down in the southern portion. On the right, we see a picture of some flooding. And so this is just, as I mentioned, one of many data sources that we are using. We're just pulling data from anywhere we can to get an idea of what the problem is and where it is. Next slide. As I mentioned, a big part of our structure inventory is critical infrastructure, and we take that very seriously. So this, on the right, this is a map of the critical infrastructure in the parish. As we see here, the university and the school, we notice that this, these are areas that have flooding problems. And so we're looking at these very closely. In addition to that, we know that I-12 and I-55 are evacuation routes from New Orleans. And so these are things that, again, we're going to look at very closely, and they help inform our decision making and what we're going to do. So, yeah.
My name is Bradley. I'm one of the hydraulic engineers on the project. So the main types of flooding we're looking at for this project are riverine flooding and also coastal surge flooding. And so what we've done is we've combined inundation maps from riverine flooding with coastal surge into combined maps to take that into account as well. And as Katie mentioned earlier in the presentation, as part of our scope, to consider structural measures, a channel must have 800 CFS for the 10% annual exceedance probability event. That's just the 10-year flood. And so that's the threshold for considering, structural measures such as attention basins and levees. And so this means that the areas we're going to be looking at for those measures are areas on the main rivers like the Tangipahoa or the Natalbany River. Yeah. And you guys all know this as you live here. The main two watersheds in this parish we're looking at are the Tangipahoa River watershed and the Natalbany River watershed, which is part of the greater Tikfaw River watershed, but we're just looking at the Natalbany River in the parish. And then some of the main tributaries are Terry's Creek, Beaver, Chapapila, Washley, Beatico, Little Natalbany, Yellow Water River, Ponchatoula, and Seltzers. Those are some of the ones that we're looking into as well. And something very important to note is you guys all know the March and August 2016 events. The March 2016 event was larger than 100-year event, and the August 2016 event was larger than a 500-year event for some parts of the parish. So we have taken those events into consideration when we make our models and we calibrate our models, but we're not necessarily designing measures for a 500-year event. So something important to note. And this is just a general view. We have detailed maps in the back for you guys to look at, but just as in a big picture, these are the 100-year and 500-year events. The 100 years in the blue, and it's hard to tell, 500 years in the red. And so the areas of the parish that are having large out-of-bank inundation are, where the Washley Creek comes into the Tangipahoa around Robert, south of Highway 22 down to the lakes, gets really inundated. And then along the Natalbany River between Amite and Independence, along the I-55 corridors, another area where there's general flooding. This is just a generality. We're not just looking at those specific areas. So we're looking into other areas as well.
All right, and I'm Lane. I'm a biologist that's working on the project. So I'm going to focus on the environmental portion. On this slide, you can see a list of significant resources that have been identified for the parish. This is kind of based on coordination and input from a variety of agencies and stakeholders. As we move forward throughout this study, we will be evaluating any potential impacts that might result from potential alternatives and measures. That assessment of those impacts. That can be positive, it can be negative, it can be a neutral impact. Those will be summarized in the study report. That report will be available for public review when it is completed, and that will be another opportunity to provide feedback on the study. And as Katie mentioned, there will be additional public meetings where we will come back and ask for additional input beyond what we're receiving from you all tonight. On this slide, so we've been coordinating with a lot of the state resource agencies, so state and federal resource agencies, and kind of talking about different strategies for avoiding or minimizing impacts to significant resources such as threatened and endangered species, maybe habitats like wetlands, or cultural or historic properties or resources that might occur in the parish. So on that first slide, we had that list of the significant resources that occur in the parish. There's kind of that natural environment component, which includes those kind of traditional kind of habitat components, and then there's the human environment, and that also includes a number of factors. Socioeconomic, environmental justice is another piece of that. And so the top paragraph here is kind of the definition of what environmental justice means. Kind of how it applies to this study is that we're actively doing outreach. Some of that has already started, and that will continue as we progress throughout the study, as a way to help ensure that everyone has access to information about the study, has the opportunity to contribute and provide input as far as kind of input on the impacts that they're experiencing in the parish, as well as input on the report as we would get to that stage. And additionally, within kind of the environmental justice piece, we'll have a separate analysis that focuses on any potential impacts that occur in environmental justice communities. And again, that can be positive, negative, or neutral sorts of impacts. And then for this is just some kind of guiding executive orders that we're kind of that are kind of guiding our analysis with the environmental justice, kind of giving us kind of a framework for that analysis. So, okay. And now I'll pass it back over to Brett.
So I'm going to be talking about how we, as the engineers and people part of this project, economists, biologists, how we come up with these measures, basically our process of how we come up with these measures. And so the first thing we do is we get a map, and there's something called a Huck watershed. And it's basically just a sub-watershed. So we get a map of all the sub-watersheds in the parish. And for this project, there's 30 sub-watersheds that are located within the boundaries of the parish. So we all sit down in a room, and we go sub-watershed by sub-watershed, in one by one, and we look at where the flooding is happening, how many structures are there, how deep are they getting inundated. We look at that on top of our flood maps. And then some of the measures that we consider are structural measures, such as detention basins, levees. Everyone knows those kind of measures. We look at things. We look at non-structural measures, things like home elevations and dry and wet flood proofing. And then we also will take into consideration natural and nature-based flood measures, such as river cane. So these are things that we look at in each sub-watershed, one at a time. And so this is just an example of a detention basin and how they work. Basically, for a detention basin specifically, water flows in upstream. For this example, water is flowing right to left. Water flows in upstream of the detention basin. The basin holds it for a while, and then it slowly releases it back into the river system. And those generally protect the lower stages downstream of the detention basin. And this is a general picture of a levee. Everyone knows what a levee does. They block water. And some things that we designed for and keep in mind is seepage under a levee. Usually there's things like pump stations behind levees to account for backup behind levees. And also they have like an impermeable layer in them as well to prevent water from going through them.
All right, thanks, Bradley. So let's talk about non-structural. So first question I have is, well, what is non-structural? So it allows for people and structures that are vulnerable to flood risk, to adapt to the flooding, and the key point is without changing the characteristics of the flood. And so I'm not going to give an example of all of these, but we're going to go through the next slides of some examples of these that you'll see. So one of the most common ones and one of the most effective is elevation. So essentially just raising the structure and contents up above base flood elevation, raising utilities. You see some pictures on the right there. There's a few different styles that you can do. It depends on the structure. And it can also be pretty large structures. I believe that's a church in Omaha. And then this structure down at the bottom, before and after, don't even really notice that it's elevated. It isn't recommended necessarily in zones with high velocities for structural criteria, but it's going to be one of the measures that we're looking at. Dry flood proofing, so it's just as it sounds, it keeps the water out. So it's important to note with dry flood proofing, it's going to have some level of seepage. They all do. That's just going to happen. And then these also we'll get to in a few different, or next slide, I think. These require active initiation. So someone has to be there in order to put on that bottom slide, bottom picture, some form of barrier in the doorway. If that doesn't happen, then water will still get through the doorway there. Dry flood proofing beyond 3 feet requires building inspection by a professional engineer to investigate structural integrity. You think of water, like 1 gallon is like 8.2 pounds roughly. It's very heavy, so we need to make sure the structures are sound to do these measures. And then, picture of a Pizza Hut. No,
I'm
you're
sorry.
good. No, you're good.
Okay.
You won't even necessarily know that it's there sometimes. These are just some examples of, as I mentioned, those active initiation things, inserts, stop logs, panel systems. There's a bunch of different mechanisms and methods to dry flood proofing. Next one, wet flood proofing, and same thing. This allows the water in. Utilities are going to be raised, contents are going to be raised, and so you're just going to allow the water to, essentially, you're going to open the doors, allow the water in, and when the floodwaters go down, it's going to dry out and be fine. These are passive, generally speaking. So as opposed to the dry flood proofing where you have to have someone put a barrier in the doorway, usually these have things like flood vents and louvers, so the water pressure on the outside of the building is going to push that open, allow the water to come in, and then once it starts receding, it's going to close it back up. And this is really good for places where they have to get back to work very quickly. So the picture on the right, this is a fire station, I believe in Omaha, and right after these floodwaters recede, they can get right back to work doing what they need to do. So these can be really effective for that. Temporary flood barriers. So there's a bunch of different forms of this. Some of them are reusable, some of them aren't. Just like dry flood proofing, there's going to be some form of seepage with these. Sometimes they can be attached to existing levee alignments to augment, sometimes not. You see 3 different examples there, kind of like a flood wall, filling some plastic containers with sand and then sandbags themselves. So again, one of the measures we're going to look at. The other one is relocation. So obviously this is going to be really effective at getting those structures that are relocated out of the floodway, because they're no longer going to be there. And as long as it's structurally sound, it could probably be moved. You see on the picture on the right, that's a pretty large home that's being moved. And then on the bottom, they're moving the whole lighthouse just out of the way. Most of the time, or I should say, these are very useful for historical or culturally important or significant buildings where you don't want to change the outside, you don't want to elevate something that's historically or culturally important, or it's not possible to do that, to elevate or dry flood proof or something like that. So relocation can be really useful for those scenarios. And then last but not least of the examples, flood warning systems and evacuation plans. So we're going to ask these questions to ourselves as we work through this planning process. Are there ways to get people out of harm's way more effectively? We're always going to ask ourselves that question. Can we improve flood forecasting? Can we know earlier in advance when a potential flood event is going to happen? Can we improve the flood warning systems to get that message out more effectively? And in terms of evacuation routes, do people know where to go? Is there going to be traffic congestion, or even does that evacuation route itself flood? These are all things we're going to consider as we move forward in the planning process and look at different alternatives.
Okay. So kind of to wrap this up in terms of the planning process and hearing from you all, working with our stakeholders, the parish with the sponsor, we're at the point where we're finalizing kind of really what the problem is, and then going back and identifying, getting to some of these specific measures, right? And how, if we don't, if we're hoping to find a recommended actions for the parish, right? If we don't, what's the risk? And I like to include this, right? What's your future of Tangipahoa Parish if nothing is done? If no, it's my understanding there's no flood control measures in the parish currently. So if that continues, taking information from existing master plans, from stakeholders, there's good documentation that obviously there'll be continual increase in flood risk, right? It's not going to go away. Sea level rise, subsidence, tropical events will keep occurring. So we have an internal evaluation process, and I wanted to include this just so you know we have this specifically kind of already tentatively developed for this project, right? So going back to our objectives, going back to how we need to design these objectives so we can be able to create metrics how we're going to reach those objectives. So for example, on the left-hand side, this is, to move a plan forward, they have to meet these criteria, right? So to create a measure and an alternative that we just went through, that the team just went through, right? It has to be, for example, I'll just pick an easy one. The second one down is effectiveness, right? So whatever we design obviously has to address, let's just say transportation, right? We mentioned that some of the interstates flood during some, so we need to create measures that will prevent that from happening in the simplest form, right? So. And finally, just to kind of put some timeframes in your mind and a schedule, in total, this plan or the study will take 3 years, maybe a little more, but this is kind of showing our plan right now. So again, we are, right there, we are here. So we're in the middle, still in the initial planning phase, right? The next step will be actually to come back to you all, right? So we're taking all the information from you tonight. Tomorrow night we'll be back in Hammond. If you love us and want to see us do this again, tell your friends. And again, with the same purpose, same thing. We want to hear from you all, working with the parish, with CPRA and stakeholders. We will begin to develop what we call the tentatively selected plan. So that's when we'll be back down here to tell you the next step of where we're at in the process. But not before we present that to you again to get your feedback, right? And then if you notice, kind of continuing down this timeline, we'll turn that into a draft report. Again, go back to you guys to get your comments on that. And then from there on, we should have a pretty good idea of what those measures, hopefully alternatives, can be to help recommend some flood risk mitigation measures for the parish. So, and then at that point, it just kind of continues the reviews, and then, the final product will be a report, like Lane mentioned, right? So, and that's right now tentatively for July of 2026. So, but the point is that those stars right there and those tentative dates generally will be when we'll be, looking to come back to you all to hear your feedback. So I'm going to leave you on this note because this is kind of what we want to hear tonight, right? Make sure that what we said, in terms of flooding scope and the problems that you're seeing kind of match or that we identify and kind of match what you're seeing. So, I saw you take a picture. Did you get it?
Not really, but that's okay.
Okay. This is online, so make sure you get it.
You can watch it after online.
Yes. And I want to include some pictures of your beautiful parish. And here is, this is probably more for people online, but obviously, if you're here tonight and want to submit comments formally or, write some out, these are the methods you can do that. So, okay. With that concludes our presentation. So we would probably just prefer just to kind of end the formal part of this. We can open up informally. We're more than willing to go back. We'll have each of us standing around the maps. So if you have questions, we're here to answer them. Probably for online folks, maybe we should open it up. Maybe if there's questions, is there questions for online? No. Okay.
There will be comments in the comments on Facebook. We all can read it.
Okay. Great. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts at this point?
How are you all going to be letting people know about the
Yeah.
back to 17. So of course now I'm going to be looking for these
Yep.
announcements more quickly, in order to better, but
Yeah.
for getting this out.
It's hard these days, right? I mean, we try to cover every basis, every media possible. I mean, we took out newspaper ads, we took out Facebook ads. We hope we did kind of printed as well as internet-based outreach. We actually had a special initiative, outreach initiative to target some of the EJ, the environmental justice communities as well. So we actually had some folks, in the parish handing flyers out to some of those communities this go around. So I'd be curious to continue that conversation though, to see, because we're always looking for ways to improve that communication.
See anything on the parish website, but there might have been, but that might be a way to ask the parish, because I'm on the parish website, like Facebook.
Sure, and I'm pretty sure it was on there. Yeah.
I just missed it.
I mean,
I'm happy I found out about it.
yeah, we are too. We are too.
Oh, good. Doing that, that's good. Okay, good. So that, I go to libraries.
Well, I'm glad that you found out and that you were able to join us.
Also, you can check the board's website. You'll have like announcements when the meeting is next week.
Oh, great.
So we'll be putting them on there.
Good, good. Okay, good.
Okay, I'll go ahead and conclude the presentation, but by all means, stick around. So thank you, everybody.